My overview of Colombo, the Unsolved Murder, is still on the back burner, but I feel like I have to say something about the book. Don Capria, a New York filmmaker, wrote this apologetic biography/conspiracy theory with mafia boss Joe Colombo's late son Anthony to sell the idea that the namesake boss of the Colombo crime family, who also created the Italian-American Civil Rights League, in an effort to suppress any mention of the mafia in public discourse, was assassinated by the US government. Published in 2015, it never received any serious scrutiny, and Capria recently got the opportunity to brag about actor Giovanni Ribisi, using it as a reference for his portrayal of Joe Colombo in The Offer. Just to give you an idea of how bad this book is, I'd like to talk about the part where it blew my suspension of disbelief out of the water. The Camp Webatuck story. Chapter 1 of Colombo, the Unsolved Murder, introduces the main character in his troubled childhood, thrown into chaos by the 1938 murder of his mobster father and his terrified mother's flight to California, leaving teenaged Joe to drop out of high school and go into the workforce, both in the legitimate world and in the rackets. By 1941, when Colombo turns 18, he's a union rep at a factory, and Capria tells us he's able to get his way in this field through diplomacy rather than violence. The book's bias is very clear, but given the co-author, that's to be expected. And up to this point, Capria has made Joe Colombo look genuinely sympathetic. And then, the author introduces one Mary Gottlieb into the story. She's a communist activist who takes notice of the persuasive and savvy Joe Colombo and introduces herself at a dinner party. Don Capria tells us that Colombo decided to give her ideas a fair hearing. I quote, "Joe did not approach anything with fear, but rather with objectivity." The two have further meetings where Gottlieb tries to sell her politics, and that summer, she persuades Joe Colombo to come with her on a trip upstate. Colombo travels to the destination she lays out with a friend, Joe Smash Gambale. Gambale is most likely our source for the story that follows, though the book doesn't make it clear if Capria got the details directly or second-hand. The venue the two Joes arrive at turns out to be a literal armed camp. Guards with assault rifles check their IDs before letting them in, and are seen standing guard throughout the premises. Capria tells us, quote, "The place they'd arrived at was Camp Webatuck, and was known by the government as a communist indoctrination facility. Joe Smash is terrified and wants out, but Joe Colombo decides to get some R&R on the campgrounds and enjoy some commie hospitality. They go to a few classes in what is supposed to be a 2-week indoctrination, but soon start blowing them off with no repercussions. Finally, Joe Colombo tells Mary Gottlieb he has to leave early. She makes one last attempt to win him over, but he simply tells her, "I am sorry, but I love my country and cannot make an alliance with this movement." And don't ask Don Capria to prove any of this. He goes out of his way to mention Colombo refused to sign Camp Webatuck's logbook or any paperwork on his way out. This story has more holes than Sonny Corleone. First, let's talk about the lack of details. The book doesn't explain how exactly Joe Colombo got to Camp Webatuck. Did he drive himself? Did Joe Gambale give him a ride? Or Mary Gottlieb, or someone from her organization? We don't have an answer, nor do we have any details on the return trip. None of the content of the supposed communist indoctrination program is disclosed. And even with Colombo and Gambale skipping classes, they should have been able to tell us something of their rhetoric. Were they Stalinist or Trotskyist? We don't have an exact date for the trip other than the summer of 1941, but it must be remembered that Hitler broke the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and invaded Russia that June. Surely the folks at Camp Webatuck must have had something to say about this development? Or anything pertaining to the ongoing world war the United States would soon become involved in? And what exactly did they say to convince Joe Colombo they were no good for America? Then, there's the whole matter of a camp full of heavily armed political radicals. Assuming this wasn't public knowledge, and Capria gives us no reason to believe it had any official government approval or oversight, why would they let Colombo and Gambale leave with the dangerous knowledge of their existence? In the context of the book, this story is included to bolster Colombo's image as a patriot in light of his military service in World War II, which was tainted by multiple instances of going AWOL. If Colombo loved his country so much, why did he not alert anyone to this threat on American soil? I don't think this sort of thing is covered in anyone's definition of omerta. The details the book does include do it no favors either. As mentioned, the guards are described as using assault rifles. Anyone who's ever binged gun articles on Wikipedia would know this type of weapon did not exist in 1941. The first prototypes of what would become the STG-44 weren't field tested until a year later. Admittedly, common use of gun terms doesn't always line up with the official definitions. For example, a submachine gun may simply be referred to as a machine gun, and I can imagine the passage of time might lead Gambale misremembering, say, Tommy guns as anachronistic AK-47s. But this mistake made me want to dig deeper. And here's what I found. Camp Webatuck was a children's summer camp that was open in the 1960s. The site had been previously occupied by Camp Unity, an adult facility that was controlled by the American Communist Party, and suspicions of continuity in the camp's management were used as a pretext for a failed bombing of Webatuck by an early far-right domestic terrorist group known as the Minutemen. Camp Unity, not to be confused with the IACRL-built summer camp of the same name, was operational in the time frame of the story Capria tells, but I can't find any references that match the literal armed camp the book describes. All it took for me to find this information were some simple and quick Google searches, with only a few brief checks on IA's open library. And yet, while Don Capria found the time to dig up a source for, say, increased use of the term mafia by the New York Times, it never occurred to him to do even the most basic fact-checking on this tall tale. When I see people praising Colombo the Unsolved Murder, I have to wonder if they've actually read the book. After all, it only took one chapter to undermine its credibility so completely. So, the next book review is underway. The subject I loosely define as non-traditional organized crime. The book itself? Well, it didn't piss me off half as much as Colombo the Unsolved Murder. I'll give it that.